I saw a black girl in a gray hoodie, quiet, invisible, unimportant, just another night janitor, just someone to walk around, someone to clean up what others left behind. What they didn't see was a storm wearing sneakers, a daughter of power who chose silence, not because she couldn't speak, but because she wanted to see the truth with her own eyes. This is not a fairy tale. It's not a story about revenge. It's not even about justice the way you're used to hearing it. It's a real story about what happens when you walk into a glass building with a mop and walk out holding the truth. About what changes when the person you mock turns out to be the one signing your paycheck. Meet Nova Bennett, daughter of a tech magnate, Harvard grad, next in line to inherit an empire. But before taking her seat at the top, she made a decision no one saw coming. She gave up the corner office and picked up a janitor's badge. Why? Because sometimes, to change a system, you have to crawl through its vents. Sometimes, to fix what's broken, you have to start at the floor no one wants to look at. And when she did, she saw everything. The smirks, the whispers, the you people comments. The water poured at her feet, the cameras recording her humiliation, the boardroom jokes that said more than the quarterly reports ever could. They didn't know who she was, but they were about to learn. This story isn't just about one woman in a hoodie. It's about all of us. Anyone who's ever been ignored, underestimated, talked over, or shut down. It's about what happens when silence becomes strategy, when humility becomes a weapon, when the overlooked become unstoppable. You're watching silent power stories. And this one will make them regret ever calling her just the help. Let's begin. The city shimmered below like circuitry in a motherboard. Endless lights, blinking towers, sharp edges. But from the 37th floor of Hollis Dynamics, all of it looked small, contained, manageable. Nova Bennett leaned her forehead against the window pane of a narrow locker room tucked behind the janitorial loading dock. Her breath fogged the glass, her reflection staring back, barely recognizable. Gone was the polished boardroom Nova. No smoky eyeliner, no statement necklace, no blazer from that boutique in Soho. Instead, she wore a baggy gray hoodie, the sleeves rolled tight around her elbows, and a pair of worn-out black sneakers she'd once donated to Goodwill and recently fished back out. She blinked once, then pulled the hood over her curls. It fell low enough to shadow her cheekbones. It was time. The badge clipped to her chest read, Layla James, Proclean Services. Position, night cleaning crew. Floor, executive wing, 3538. No one had questioned the paperwork. No one ever did when it came through subcontracted janitorial agencies. Background checks, HR onboarding, orientation, all handled by Proclean. And that was exactly the point. No one would see her. That was what her father had warned her about. Nova, he'd said, voice thin through the oxygen line after his third cardiac episode. You know how to run numbers, lead meetings, close deals, but you don't know how it feels when someone sees your skin and assumes less. Not from this angle, not from the floor. She had looked away, ashamed to admit he was right. Her father, Marlon Bennett, had built Hollis Dynamics from his garage after being laid off from a job he wasn't supposed to have in the first place. A black engineer in the late 80s trying to sell enterprise software? Laughable, until it wasn't. He made it. Barely. But now the man who built a billion-dollar firm from dirt wanted her to inherit it, and she wasn't sure she deserved to. That's why they made the plan. Nova took the service elevator. No music. No mirrors. Just chip gray paint and a faint chemical smell. When the doors opened, the executive wing greeted her like a museum after hours. Polished, clinical, soulless. Her sneakers squeaked faintly against the marble. She wheeled the mop bucket down the hallway, past framed photos of company milestones, Marlon shaking hands with Bill Gates. Nova as a child next to a giant server. The IPO launch on NASDAQ. Not one person in the building would connect Layla James to any of it. And that was the test. At 10:47 p.m., she entered the main boardroom. The air smelled faintly of cologne, dry erase markers, and stale ambition. Someone had left coffee cups and a pile of bald napkins near the corner. She sighed and began to clean. The silence was thick, but she welcomed it, until she heard the footsteps, sharp, purposeful, male. A tall man in a navy wool coat appeared in the doorway, face buried in a tablet, mid-40s, graying at the temples. His cologne hit first, something sharp and old money. Nova didn't look up. He didn't speak. Instead, he walked across the room and, without warning, dropped a stack of folders directly into her mop water. Nova froze. Then slowly she turned her head. Not too fast, just enough to meet his eyes. He didn't flinch, didn't apologize, just sneered. "Next time, move faster," he said. "This floor needs to be spotless by 11. That includes your attitude." Then he turned and left. Nova blinked. Her hands shook slightly. Not from fear, from rage, from the force it took to not react. Because that man, that was Tristan Weller, VP of Operations, the same man who had handed her an award just 6 months ago at the Women in Tech Gala. The same man who once said to her over cocktails, "You're not like other DEI hires, Nova. You're sharp." He hadn't recognized her now. She stared down at the paper soaking in the bucket, then picked up her mop, pressed her lips into a line, and kept cleaning. They wouldn't see her. Not yet. But they would. Soon. The night deepened. At Hollis Dynamics, the higher the floor, the colder it got. Not in temperature, but in energy. The executive levels had a way of draining warmth. The laughter, the jokes, the friendly chatter of the lower departments. None of that reached floor 37. Nova, Layla, she reminded herself, moved from office to office, emptying bins, wiping surfaces, scrubbing coffee rings off quartz countertops. No one looked at her. Those who were still working didn't pause their phone calls. Some even walked around her cart as if she were part of the architecture. Invisibility was a superpower, but tonight it felt more like a sentence. In the corridor near the product strategy hub, she saw him again. Tristan. He leaned against the wall outside a glass-walled conference room, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was calm, clipped. "No, she's not coming back," he said. "Marlon's kid isn't ready. She's soft. She's optics, not leadership. We'll find a way to keep the board steady until they see that." A long pause, then a soft laugh. "Yeah, she's never even set foot below level 20. You think she's seen a supply closet?" Nova ducked her head, heart pounding. He was talking about her, to someone important. And worse, he was right. She had spent years at Hollis. Yes, but always in polished roles. Director of Sustainability, VP of Impact, Strategic Advisor. She had built initiatives, crafted roadmaps, delivered keynotes, but she'd never cleaned toilets. And she'd never heard her name spoken like that, like it didn't belong. She kept her head down and kept pushing the cart, but inside something cracked. Not her confidence, not yet, but a piece of the illusion she'd built for herself. Her world had been one of respect, mentorship, and admiration, but now she saw the scaffolding holding that world up, and how thin it was. At 1:12 a.m., Nova entered the last office on the 36th floor. Room 3614, glass desk, chrome lamp, frame photo of a blonde boy in a baseball uniform. A nameplate read, "Will Danner, Executive Director, R&D. The man himself was still there, hunched over two monitors. His tie was loose, sleeves rolled. Nova started dusting quietly in the corner, mindful of his space. But when she moved to empty his trash, he looked up suddenly. "You don't have to do that right now," he said, voice low. She froze. "I mean," he added, "you look dead on your feet. Take a break. There's coffee in the kitchen." Nova stared at him, surprised. He didn't smile, just nodded, turned back to his work. No sneer, no insult, no demand. Just respect, or something like it. She didn't know how to respond. "Thanks," she said quietly, almost forgetting to lower her voice into Layla's register. In the hallway outside the kitchen, she leaned against the wall, letting the silence settle over her. That moment with Will wasn't salvation, but it was oxygen. It reminded her, not everyone here was corrupted. Not yet. There were still people who saw beyond uniforms. People who didn't have to know your last name to treat you with dignity. And she needed to remember that, because this wasn't just a social experiment anymore. It was a reckoning. She sipped burnt coffee from a paper cup, her mind replaying every moment. The folder dunked in mop water, the comment about optics, the way her name was already being erased behind closed doors. The hoodie clung to her skin, damp from sweat. She wasn't just wearing it to hide anymore. She was wearing it as armor, the kind her father had once worn when no one believed in his code, his company, or his vision. Now it was her turn. By 3:06 a.m., Nova had cleaned 3 kitchens, 6 meeting rooms, and 1 executive bathroom with a leaky sink and a tile stain that refused to budge. Her back ached. Her gloves were soaked through. But her mind, sharp, alert, refused to rest. Each hallway she passed through was a reminder. She had walked these same paths before in heels, giving TED-style talks, shaking hands with venture capitalists. But not like this. Not with people stepping over her mop handle as if it weren't even there. And they didn't just ignore her. They expected her not to exist. Near the elevator, she passed 2 junior analysts in suits laughing over open laptops. "Dude, the cleaning lady scared me," one said, not even bothering to whisper. She came out of nowhere, like a horror movie jump scare. The other guy laughed, mouthful of protein bar. "She's probably one of those DEI hires the cleaning company picked to look progressive." They both burst out laughing. Nova didn't stop walking. She didn't flinch, but her hands clenched inside the gloves. She ducked into the janitor's closet on 36. A tiny space, 1 bucket, a cracked mirror. She locked the door behind her and leaned her forehead against the cool metal shelf. Her breath came in short, steady pulses. Not panic, not sadness. Resolve. This wasn't new. Not for someone who'd grown up in tech boardrooms. The only black girl at robotics camp. The only one with Bennett as a last name and skin like espresso. But it never stopped stinging. What hurt wasn't what they said. It was how easily they said it. How casually they dismissed the people who cleaned their trash, scrubbed their floors, kept their world turning. People like her grandmother, who cleaned office buildings in Queens for 30 years without a single thank you. People like her. She stared into the cracked mirror. The hoodie stared back. A symbol, a disguise, a shield. She tugged the drawstrings tight and whispered, "You have no idea who I am." Not to brag, not to threaten, just to remind herself. Because before the week was over, they would know. As dawn approached, Nova returned to the 37th floor. She wanted one last sweep of the executive boardroom. When she entered, the blinds were still drawn. The city glowed faintly through the glass like a memory, and someone was sitting at the far end of the table. Tristan, again. This time, he wasn't on the phone. He was staring at her. No smirk, no clipboard, just those cold eyes. Blue-gray, calculating. "You missed a spot," he said, pointing to the far corner of the table. Nova pushed the mop forward, silent, but he didn't move aside. He stood, walked to her, and looked down. "I've seen a lot of temps come through here," he said. Most don't last a week. She didn't answer. You? He leaned in slightly, voice low. You don't belong here. He smiled faintly, like he was proud of that observation. Something about you's off. You're too quiet, too observant. Nova held his gaze. Just for a second. Then she dipped her head and kept mopping. Behind her, she heard him chuckle and walk away. But inside, she burned. Because that was the point. She didn't belong here. Not as Layla, but as Nova Bennett. She was about to own this place. Outside, the sky began to lighten. The first emails of the day were being sent. The scent of fresh coffee drifted through the air vents. And in the janitor's locker room, Nova peeled off her gloves. The hoodie was still on. Still armor, still power. And as she stepped into the morning light, invisible, exhausted, and more certain than ever, she knew they wouldn't see her coming. But when she arrived, they'd never forget. The second night began not with footsteps, but with a silence that felt planned. There was something sharpened in the air, as if someone had noticed her existence the night before. Not her face, not her name, but her presence. And that was dangerous, because the moment they noticed, they tried to push. Nova Bennett, still hidden beneath the name Layla James and her weathered gray hoodie, stepped into Hollis Dynamics at 9:57 p.m. sharp. Same routine, same badge, same bleach smell clinging to the collar. But this time, she didn't just walk in to observe. She walked in expecting a strike, and it didn't take long. The night cleaning shift always started in the locker alcove on the service floor. 3 benches, rusted lockers, a vending machine that hadn't worked since 2016. Ramona Chase, the night supervisor, was already waiting. She was a stocky woman in her 50s, with a limp in her right leg and the energy of someone who'd long stopped hoping for raises or respect. She barely glanced at Nova as she handed over a clipboard. Same assignment, Ramona muttered. Executive floors, kitchenettes, glass, restrooms. And Mr. Weller says his glass table needs extra attention tonight. Nova took the clipboard, nodded. Yes, ma'am. Ramona hesitated, then added, he also asked to be notified when you reach his office. Nova paused. Why? Ramona frowned. Didn't say. Just said to let him know. There it was. Attention. Nova gave a stiff nod, then pushed her cart toward the elevator, the wheels creaking under the weight of detergent and silent resentment. By 10:30 p.m., the executive kitchen on the 36th floor was already littered with coffee cups, snack wrappers, and traces of rushed meetings. Nova set to work, moving with quiet efficiency. She liked cleaning, not because it was noble, though it was, but because it gave her control over one small corner of a world that tried hard to belittle people like her. She wiped down surfaces, sorted recycling, emptied the compost bin. Then she heard voices entering from the hallway. Dean Alcott, VP of Product Strategy, and Miles Kerr, Director of Data Integration. Both white, both powerful, both deeply unaware that their words were about to land on ears more attentive than they imagined. I'm telling you, man, Dean said, voice slick with arrogance. The board's going to eat her alive. She's got that polished act, sure, but she's soft. Way too corporate day darling to handle blood in the water. Miles chuckled. They don't want a leader. They want a symbol. That's what Nova Bennett is. A pretty check mark for every diversity slide in the investor deck. Dean whistled. Imagine your dad builds a billion-dollar company and you turn it into a glorified nonprofit. They laughed. Hard. Miles added, she doesn't even know what the inside of a janitor's closet looks like. Nova didn't turn, didn't flinch. She just wiped the same counter twice, her eyes locked on a stain that had already been erased. But in her mind, she recorded every word. Not just in memory, but with the mic sewn into the hem of her hoodie. Every breath, every syllable. Logged for later. By 11:15 p.m., she was polishing glass on floor 37. Her gloves squeaked softly against the surface. The skyline behind the windows pulsed with city lights. The world out there moved on, unaware of what was happening in this building. She was finishing the West Conference door when a shadow entered the hallway. Tristan Weller. Nova could feel him before she heard him. The scent of his cologne, the cadence of his gait, the particular way his silence always arrived just before a condescending remark. "Well," he said, folding his arms, "look at that. The cleaning crew actually finishes something on time." Nova said nothing, just kept wiping. Tristan stepped forward. "You're not very chatty, are you?" Still no answer. He moved even closer, his breath now within range of hers. "Let me guess," he continued, voice low. "You think being quiet makes you invisible, but it doesn't. It makes you suspicious." He pointed at the glass she had just cleaned. "There," he said, tapping his finger. "Smudge," she checked. There was nothing. But then, deliberately, he pressed his thumb against the pristine glass. "There. Now it's real." Nova met his eyes. Just for a second. No fear, no rage, only calculation. Because now the first move had been made. Not an accident, a warning. Nova finished polishing the smudged glass door slowly, carefully, deliberately. Like it mattered. Like every second of silence was a line she was drawing in chalk between herself and Tristan Weller. She could feel his eyes on her, waiting, testing, but he said nothing more. He simply turned and walked away, the sound of his shoes echoing down the hall like the end of a cheap threat. She let out a quiet breath. Not relief, focus. The first strike had landed. Back in the janitorial supply room, Nova removed her gloves and checked the small digital recorder embedded in the seam of her hoodie's right pocket. A red light blinked steady. She pressed a button. Rewind. Play. "Let me guess. You think being quiet makes you invisible, but it doesn't. It makes you suspicious. Click, save, archive." This wasn't paranoia. This was protection. Nova had grown up in a house where her father taught her two truths. Never fight where you can't win, and never walk into a room without knowing your exits and your evidence. So she didn't swing back at men like Tristan. She just documented them. And when the time came, she let their own words do the cutting. At 12:43 a.m., Nova entered a private office with a view of the river. Glass walls, minimalist decor, a standing desk, and a black nameplate etched in silver. Will Danner, Executive Director, R&D. He was there again, still working. Same quiet presence, same unreadable posture. Nova kept her head low, cleaned around him without a word. Halfway through disinfecting his keyboard tray, he spoke. "You were here last night." She paused. "Yes, sir." He glanced at her, his tone neutral but not cold. "You left the sink spotless. Most don't." Nova didn't know how to respond. "Thank you," she managed. "You from around here?" he asked. She hesitated. "Queens." He nodded slowly. "Same." A beat of silence passed. Then he added, "If anyone gives you a hard time, document it. These halls have good walls but bad echoes." Nova turned toward him, met his eyes. They weren't kind. They weren't cruel. They were aware. And in that moment, she understood. Will Danner wasn't an ally, but he wasn't blind either. She finished the office and moved on. The exchange with Will lingered in her thoughts, like the first time you see a crack in a flawless vase. Subtle, but proof that even polish has limits. By 1:30 a.m., Nova was back in the south wing, pushing her cart toward the elevator, when the voice called out from behind her, "Hey, cleaning girl!" She turned. It was Samantha Holt, executive assistant to the CFO. Young, ambitious, always walked like she was late to something important. Samantha waved her hand impatiently toward a conference room. I spilled green juice on the chair fabric in 38B. Smells like seaweed and feet. Can you fix that now? Like, immediately, before Brandon sees it and freaks. Nova nodded once. Yes, ma'am. Thanks. Oh, and while you're at it, can you Febreze the whole room? I have a sensitive nose and a 9 a.m. with a very judgmental board member. Then Samantha added under her breath, just loud enough to register, this is why I don't drink kale anymore. It's for poor people pretending to be rich. She didn't look at Nova when she said it, just walked away. Nova stared at the closed conference room door for a moment, then entered. The room wasn't that messy, just a splash of green on one of the suede chairs and a faint sour smell in the air. She sprayed, scrubbed, steamed. But in her mind, the juice, the chair, the sarcasm, none of it mattered. What mattered was the tone, the assumption, the casual dismissal of someone doing a job with quiet pride, and how easily that job became invisible the moment it was complete. She sat in the room when she finished, just for a moment, let herself breathe. Then she whispered to no one, "You people have no idea what I see, or who I am." And then quietly, she pulled out a small notepad from her pocket, a log. She flipped to a new page and wrote, Day 2, executives logged making dismissive comments. Dean Alcott, 2 instances. Miles Kerr, 1 instance. Tristan Weller, direct manipulation. Samantha Holt, derogatory remark. Notes, Will Danner, potentially neutral. Keep observing. Emotional state, controlled. Processing, not reacting, yet. She tucked the notepad away, put her gloves back on, adjusted the hoodie, and walked on. The night dragged deeper into quiet. By 2:12 a.m., with the upper floors of Hollis Dynamics had sunk into a stillness that almost felt sacred, the kind of stillness that power loves, where mistakes are hidden under rugs and conversations drift without witnesses. Except tonight, someone was listening. Nova moved her cart through the narrow corridor near the executive marketing suite. Every corner of the building was familiar, but not like this. Not in this uniform. Not from this low vantage point, pushing wheels and wiping down smudges left behind by people too important to care who cleaned up after them. She turned the corner and almost ran into 2 interns, both barely out of college, mid-conversation. They froze for a second, startled not by her, but by her uniform. "Oh," one said, laughing nervously. "Thought you were somebody." Nova offered a polite nod. Then one of them, the shorter one with gelled blonde hair, leaned into his friend and stage whispered, "Bet she knows where they stash the booze after holiday parties." Both snickered and walked off, one mumbling, "Better this than flipping burgers." Nova didn't respond, just watched them go. Young arrogance wasn't new, but it burned a little hotter when it mirrored the contempt of older, richer men who should have known better. This place, her legacy, was growing mold in the corners, and she was finally starting to smell it. At 2:46 a.m., Nova reached Tristan Weller's office. The door was unlocked. She stepped inside slowly. The room was pure masculine excess. Walnut paneling, custom standing desk, digital art screen looping landscapes of Iceland. On the center table sat an empty Scotch glass in a folder marked Legal, DEI Oversight Audit. She noticed that the corner of the folder had a handwritten note. This performative crap won't save her when the board starts counting profits. Nova's breath caught for half a second. It wasn't just disrespect now. It was war. He wasn't just doubting her. He was preparing to undermine her transition, already laying groundwork with legal, setting the narrative that her leadership would be a risk to the company. She stood completely still in the center of his office. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from restraint. Then she did something she hadn't planned. She reached into her hoodie pocket, pulled out a disposable phone with a blank SIM, and snapped 2 quick photos of the note and the folder. Click, click. Then she replaced everything exactly as it was. No one would know. Not yet. But one day those images would mean something. She finished cleaning his desk with slow, deliberate care. She polished the Scotch ring into a perfect shine, left the room better than she found it, because she wanted no excuses when the day came. Back downstairs in the janitor's break room, Nova sat on a folding chair next to the water cooler. Her gloves were off, her sleeves pushed up, her face glistened with sweat and reflection. Ramona walked in a minute later, holding a clipboard. "You good?" Nova nodded. Ramona sat beside her, exhaling like a tire deflating. "You move quiet," she said after a pause. Nova smiled faintly. "That a bad thing?" "No," Ramona said, staring straight ahead. "Means you see what others miss?" Nova looked at her. "And what do you see?" Ramona rubbed her temple, chuckled dryly. "I see a building full of people who think they're smarter than everyone else, and a girl in a hoodie who's about to show them they're wrong." Nova froze, then blinked. Ramona met her gaze. Calm, knowing, but not accusatory. "I ain't stupid," Ramona said. "I've worked here 17 years. I've seen every intern, exec, and assistant. You? You don't move like someone cleaning for the paycheck. You move like someone taking notes." Nova didn't answer. Didn't have to. Ramona stood. "Whatever game you're playing, just don't forget who's in your corner. Some of us see, even when we don't speak." Then she walked out, leaving Nova in the silence of everything unspoken. She pulled her hoodie tight. The building was quiet now, but underneath it, something had started to tremble. The first strike had landed, and no one even knew the war had begun. By the time Nova clocked in for her third night as Layla James, the facade of calm professionalism at Hollis Dynamics had started to crack, just enough for ugliness to seep through. And ugliness never walks alone. It brings an audience. She had learned by now to move like background noise, quiet, efficient, unmemorable. But something about this shift felt off before she even stepped into the elevator. The building was too still. The silence wasn't passive anymore. It was curated, manufactured, like a pause before a punchline. Her first stop was the creative suite on floor 35, the kind of open concept space designed by someone who'd never worked a night shift. The desks were littered with half-eaten granola bars, spilled coffee near ring-bound pitch books, and discarded whiteboard notes that hadn't aged well. One line in particular caught her eye. "Nova Bennett, DEI PR stunt." It was written in blocky blue ink, underlined twice. Below it, someone had drawn a cartoonish crown with a question mark next to it. The message wasn't subtle. It was spite hidden under strategy. Classic corporate. Nova stared at it for a long moment, then slowly erased it with a single swipe of her microfiber cloth. Behind her, footsteps. A voice sliced the air like a whip. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" Nova turned to see Madeline Rusk, creative director and longtime gatekeeper of the company's brand image, striding toward her in heels far too loud for the late hour. "Just erasing the board," Nova answered calmly. "That board held our brainstorming session for the Q4 launch. Some of that was intellectual property." Nova glanced back. It was about to stain the surface. Madeline narrowed her eyes. "You people never think ahead. Always so quick to wipe things clean, never considering what's important." Nova let the insult hang in the air, not because she didn't hear it, but because she did, and because everyone else in the room did too. At least 4 people were seated nearby, junior designers and analysts pretending to look busy, suddenly very focused on their laptops. None of them looked up. "Clean the fridge next," Madeline added as she turned on her heel. "There's a smell, and I don't have the time to care whose lunch died in there." Nova moved on, but her stomach turned. Not from the comment, from the quiet approval of everyone who heard it and stayed silent. At 12:20 a.m., Nova entered conference room 38B. She expected an empty space, maybe the ghost of a forgotten salad container. Instead, she walked into a crowd. Tristan Weller sat at the head of the table, flanked by Dean Alcott and Miles Kerr, their ties loosened, top buttons undone, the look of men drunk on overtime and entitlement. Across from them sat two interns, nervously chuckling at something not funny. Nova stopped just inside the door, instinctively tightening her hoodie strings. Tristan didn't even look up at first. He just gestured casually toward the far end of the room. "There's a spill by the table leg. Handle that, will you?" She nodded once, rolled her card over, bent down to reach under the table. That's when she heard it. Click. The unmistakable shutter of a phone camera. She looked up. Dean had his phone out, screen glowing, still recording. "Perfect timing," he smirked. "This is gold." Nova froze. "Excuse me." Dean laughed, showing the screen to Miles. "Just documenting workplace excellence. You know, before she sues us for discrimination or something." Tristan looked up now. His grin was slow, deliberate. Caption it, "The Future of Hollis," or maybe "Where the Boss's Daughter Belongs." Nova's heart thudded in her chest, not from embarrassment, but fury buried too deep to show. The interns laughed, not because they found it funny, but because they didn't know what else to do. One of them said, "Damn, this is going viral for sure." Nova stood upright, not abruptly, not dramatically, just calmly. She looked Dean in the eye and said nothing. She looked at Tristan. Still nothing, because she knew. In their world, silence from a hoodie meant permission. But this time it meant preparation. She turned without a word and pushed her cart out of the room, back straight, shoulders square, the humiliation trailing behind her like oil on a clean floor. Down the hall, into the elevator, press 32. Wait. She stood alone, the elevator humming as it dropped floors like falling trust. Her hands were shaking, not from shame, from restraint. She wanted to tear off the hoodie, march back upstairs, and tell them exactly who she was. But she couldn't, not yet. In the service corridor behind the employee gym, she found a quiet corner, pulled out her notepad, wrote in clean, angry strokes. Day 3. Incident log. Madeline Rusk. Condescending tone. Racialized generalization. Dean Alcott. Non-consensual photo. Public shaming. Tristan Weller. Instigator. Enabling humiliation. 2 interns participated in mocking, unnamed notes. No intervention from peers. Silence. Shock and complicity. Emotional state. Focused. Record first. Respond later. Let them build the fire. She tucked the notebook away, readjusted the hoodie. The pain in her chest wasn't sadness, it was fuel. They thought the public humiliation would push her into the background. But what they didn't realize, they just made her unforgettable. The next night, the air in Hollis Dynamics felt different. Not just cold, tainted. Nova stepped through the side entrance at 9:58 p.m., the same hoodie wrapped around her like armor. Her gloves felt heavier tonight. Not from sweat or grime, but from memory. Memory of laughter, of flashes, of faces smirking behind titles. They hadn't just insulted her, they had performed her worthlessness for others, and no one had stopped them. The break room on the 36th floor was empty when she arrived, but she could tell someone had been there recently. The coffee machine was still warm. The scent of toasted bagels hung in the air. As she sprayed the table, she noticed a flyer left behind. One of the company's diversity and belonging brochures from last year's Empowerment Week. The cover read in bold, "Every voice matters. Every role counts." Nova scoffed. The same company that printed this garbage had let 3 senior execs record her like a zoo animal, and not a soul intervened. She crumpled the flyer slowly and dropped it in the bin. She didn't need their slogans. At 10:43 p.m., while cleaning the elevator vestibule, Nova overheard 2 admin assistants chatting just around the corner. "I heard Tristan's thinking about filing a formal report," one whispered. "Said that new cleaning girl gave him a weird vibe." "You mean Layla?" "Yeah, he said she was too observant." "Seriously? That's the complaint now?" "I don't know. He said she was lurking near his office, and some documents went missing." Nova's breath caught. She hadn't taken anything. But she had photographed his DEI audit note. She hadn't realized he'd noticed. Of course he noticed. Men like Tristan always noticed when control slipped, even slightly. Just after midnight, Nova returned to conference room 38B, this time armed with purpose. She needed to reclaim that space. Not physically, but mentally, to prove to herself that it wasn't haunted, that it didn't belong to the people who humiliated her. She flipped the lights on. The room was empty. She moved to clean, wiped the chairs, disinfected the table, polished the light switch plates. Then under the edge of the long conference table, she saw something taped beneath. A phone. Recording light blinking faintly. Nova froze, pulled it off slowly. It was a company-issued device with a label on the back. Hollis IT property of T. Weller. Her blood went cold. They were still watching her. This wasn't a joke anymore. It was a setup. She slid the phone into an evidence bag from her cart, part of a backup kit she started carrying after night 1. Then she wiped down every surface again. Scrubbed away the idea of ever having been safe in this building. Later, in the loading dock stairwell, she sat on a step with her back against the concrete wall, the hoodie's hood drawn low. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I know who you are. You should stop before it gets worse." Nova stared at the screen. The words were sharp, but predictable. She didn't flinch. Instead, she did what her father had always taught her when power starts to tremble. She smiled. She opened her notebook. Added to the log. Day 4, escalation. Surveillance discovered. Unauthorized recording device, Weller. Gossip campaign initiated. Admin assistants overheard false narrative. Threat received via burner number. Timestamp logged. Status. They are trying to break control. That means they feel hers. Emotional state. No longer silent. Strategic. She snapped a photo of the page, backed it up to an encrypted drive, stored the physical copy in a sealed folder inside her janitor's cart. Then she stood up, straightened her back, and whispered, "Humiliate me in public, I'll dismantle you in daylight." By 1:27 a.m., Nova stood just outside the main lobby of the 37th floor, the executive floor. The walls were glass, the floor marble, and the silence in that wing was never quite silent. It was heavy, like unspoken rules pressing in from every direction. She stood still for a long time, watching her own reflection in the marble. The hoodie, the cart, the badge that didn't belong to her, all of it. They had turned her into a punchline, a body to point at, a placeholder for a position no one wanted her to fill. But tonight wasn't about them. Tonight she had work to do. As she entered the lobby to buff the floor, she saw Tristan Weller standing with Dean Alcott near the coffee bar. A few other night shift managers were hovering nearby, all pretending to be busy with clipboards and low murmurs. Tristan turned the moment he heard the squeak of her mop wheels. "Perfect timing," he said loudly. Nova kept moving, cautious but neutral. He stepped in front of her cart, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "I think you missed a very important spot last night," he said, gesturing toward the far end of the glass conference wall. She followed his hand. It was the same area he had smeared the glass before. Nothing visible now. "Still," she said, "I can take care of it." Good, he replied, smiling, but not the polite kind. The trap is already set kind. Dean walked up beside him, holding his phone again. Recording. Let's make sure you do it right this time, he said with a grin. Nova reached for her microfiber cloth. Tristan raised his voice. On your knees, use the brush. You'll get better leverage that way. His tone was light, almost playful, but everyone around them knew it wasn't a request. It was a command, a scene, a carefully arranged moment of humiliation. Nova paused, cloth still in hand. She looked around. A few other employees glanced over from their cubicles. No one intervened. No one stopped him. She knelt, slowly, calmly, not because they told her to, but because she chose to own the moment. She began scrubbing the spotless glass with methodical precision. Dean muttered, "Now that's the kind of initiative this company needs." A few chuckles followed. Nova finished, stood up, reached for her cart. Then Tristan took a water bottle from the bar behind him, uncapped it, and with a flick of his wrist, splashed it onto the floor beside her. The water splattered across the clean marble, soaking her left shoe. You missed that spot too, he said, all smiles. And that was it. The moment. The line crossed in public. The stain that wouldn't wash out, not from the floor, but from their character. Nova locked eyes with him, long, unflinching, and said nothing. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's a storm waiting to choose its hour. She turned without a word, rolled her cart to the elevator, and left the scene as calmly as she had entered it. Behind her, Tristan called out, "Try using both hands next time. Might clean faster." Another round of snickers, but none of it touched her. Not now. Not anymore. At 2:12 a.m., Nova sat in the dimly lit break area of the sub-basement. No one came down here except for supply refills and to avoid HR during breakdowns. She opened her notebook, wrote slowly. Day 5, public incident, witnessed. Tristan Weller, verbal and physical provocation. Dean Alcott, filming, mocking. Audience 5 observers, no intervention. Summary intentional humiliation, no accountability, pattern established. Emotional state, centered, not broken. Fire, contained. She tucked the notebook into a waterproof sleeve, opened a second envelope, sealed and labeled. Bored eyes only. Inside were the images, the transcripts, and the timeline she had been building. Carefully, silently. She placed it in her backpack, zipped it shut. On her way out, she passed Ramona in the stairwell. The older woman looked her up and down, saw the wet shoes, the mop water stain, the stillness in Nova's face. You okay, baby? Ramona asked softly. Nova paused, then nodded once. I'm getting there. Ramona looked at her like a woman who knew exactly what getting there really meant, and said, Don't let them break your walk. Nova turned. I won't, she said. Then she walked off, quietly, proudly, with soaked shoes and a dry soul. Because the humiliation, that belonged to them now. The 6th night began with a cold sky and a colder silence. Nova stood at the bus stop 2 blocks from Hollis Dynamics, hoodie zipped to her chin, backpack heavy with evidence and purpose. Her breath floated in the dark like a warning. The bruises from the last shift weren't on her skin. They were under it, in the silence that followed that water bottle, in the looks people gave her the next day, in the way no one said anything, even after everything was caught on camera. But tonight, they would say something. Because tonight, the attack wasn't going to be symbolic. It was going to be policy. 9:58 p.m. Nova badged in with the same neutral face, same rubber gloves, same posture of a person no one ever expected to speak. But as she turned the corner toward the janitorial closet, she found Ramona standing still, holding a clipboard like it was a resignation letter. You've been flagged, Ramona said, voice low. Nova paused. Flagged for what? Suspicion of unauthorized surveillance. Security said someone's been planting devices. They didn't name you outright, but you're the only new face this month, and Tristan's been pushing. Nova felt the weight of the backpack on her shoulders grow heavier. Do they have proof? Ramona snorted. They don't need proof, honey. Just power. Nova clenched her jaw. This wasn't about a fake accusation. It was about creating noise. Enough noise to discredit her before she could open her mouth. They're trying to force an exit, Nova said. Ramona nodded slowly. And when they can't find anything on paper, they'll find something on camera. Trust me, they always do. At 10:30 p.m., Nova stepped onto the 36th floor. Everything looked the same. The glass still gleamed. The walls still whispered. The Empire still slept. But every step felt louder now. The air had changed. And then she saw it. A company-wide email open on an abandoned screen at the reception desk. From T. Weller to Exec Floor Access Distribution. Subject, security incident, unverified personnel. We are currently investigating a breach of protocol involving a temporary employee possibly engaging in inappropriate data gathering activities. Please do not interact directly. Report any suspicious behavior to HR immediately. The email didn't say her name. It didn't have to. Nova looked up. Two associates across the hall were already whispering. One pointed. The others shook their head and stepped back. The line wasn't blurry anymore. It had been crossed. Loud, public, intentional. She wasn't just being erased quietly. They were targeting her now. Nova pushed her cart down the hall, breathing evenly. At 10:52 p.m., she reached the IT corridor. A small maintenance door sat slightly ajar. She paused, listened. Voices. Miles Kerr, Director of Data Integration, and a man from Corporate Risk. Someone Nova didn't know by name, but recognized from company town halls. She's not just a cleaner, Miles said. She's connected. I've seen her face before, maybe at an investor gala last spring. Weller's got his eye on her, the other man replied. We think she's a plant from the DEI board. They're testing us. Nova's chest tightened. They want us to screw up, Miles continued. Catch us on video saying something stupid. Then they bring it to the board, fire the old guard, bring in fresh hires that check more boxes. The other man chuckled. Wouldn't be the first time. That's the game now. Nova stepped back, quiet, steady, but in her mind, fire. She ducked into an unused office and sat on the edge of the desk. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with clarity. This wasn't bullying anymore. This was systemic defense. Gatekeepers locking the doors before the new voice could speak, before someone like her, someone black, female, and strategic, could actually lead. They weren't scared she was a threat. They were scared she had receipts. And they were right to be scared, because she did. Nova sat still in the darkened office, her heart a slow drum in her chest. The world outside the glass walls buzzed with hushed voices and hollow light. But inside the small square of silence, she could see it all. The traps, the whispers, the slow, systemic violence of corporate sabotage. This wasn't just ego or arrogance anymore. It was defense. She had touched something they had buried too deep to name. Something sacred to them. Control. And now they were closing ranks. Not by firing her. That would be too obvious, too actionable. No, they would let the system do it. They would tighten the rules, rearrange her tasks, reroute her badge, isolate her until her presence was called non-compliant, until the only choice she had left was to disappear. At 11:06 p.m., Nova returned to her cart and headed for the 38th floor, her path interrupted by a text alert on her burner phone. the secure one she kept hidden in the flap of her hoodie. Unknown number. You're digging too deep. You're not untouchable. Nova stared at the message. The burner had never been shared. It wasn't even registered under her name. They weren't guessing anymore. They knew. The elevator opened into a floor dimly lit by motion sensors, casting long shadows between the desks. As she pushed the cart forward, she heard someone cough, a fake rehearsed sound. She turned the corner and found Samantha Holt, the CFO's assistant, standing beside a small trash bin with a toppled smoothie and a stack of binders. Samantha crossed her arms. "You're late." "I wasn't assigned this area tonight," Nova replied calmly. "Well, it's yours now." Nova stepped forward, kneeling beside the spill. As she reached for a rag, Samantha leaned against the wall and smiled slightly. "You know," she said, "you've been quite the conversation lately." Nova didn't respond. "I mean, Tristan said we might be dealing with a saboteur, someone hired to test the culture." She made air quotes with her fingers, eyes locked on Nova. "Wild theory, right?" Nova continued cleaning. Samantha crouched slightly, lowering her voice. "But if that's true, if someone really is watching us, don't you think it's kind of stupid? Coming in here pretending to be one of them? The help?" Nova glanced up. Samantha straightened. "I mean, you're clearly not just a janitor. You look like you read." She walked off without another word. Nova finished the job in silence, but her hands were slow, deliberate. Every word Samantha had said wasn't just insult, it was confirmation. They were building the case. She wasn't just being framed as a threat. She was being reduced to a joke. A janitor who thought she was smart. A black girl who got too curious. Someone who dared to enter a space never meant for her and stayed long enough to see the cracks. At 12:22 a.m., her badge stopped working. The little red light blinked 3 times when she tried to enter the 37th floor. She tried again. Same blink. Same denial. From behind her, she heard footsteps. A soft voice followed. "You lost?" Nova turned to see Alan Chu, mid-level manager in business development, a man she remembered shaking hands with at a donor event 2 years earlier. He didn't recognize her now. "No," she replied. "Just trying to finish my floor." "That floor's restricted tonight," Alan said, tapping the badge on his own chest. "New policy, temporary workers get limited access after midnight." "When was that decided?" He smiled, too smooth. "Probably right after someone started poking around where they didn't belong." Nova said nothing, just nodded, backed away, and turned down the hall. But her heart was thundering. They had locked her out. Of the floor, of the building, of the system. And now they were pushing her toward the edge. Quietly, carefully, so HR wouldn't have to lift a finger. This was erasure. Strategic. Targeted. Almost surgical. She retreated to the janitor's lounge. Empty except for the hum of an old vending machine. Sat down, took out her notebook. Flipped to a fresh page. Day 6. Escalation tactics. Smeared by executive assistant. Verbal threat. Racial tone. Badge deactivated without notice. Unauthorized surveillance mentioned by multiple parties. Text threat from unknown source. Reassigned without chain of command protocol. Intent. Sabotage reputation. Isolate target. Instigate departure. Response strategy. Hold ground. Document everything. Prepare to reveal identity. Finalize archive for board. She tore the page carefully, slipped it into the sealed envelope labeled Stage 2. Her hands were shaking, but not with fear, with decision, because this wasn't infiltration anymore. This was a war for truth, and if they wanted to make her a ghost, she'd haunt every floor until the lies collapsed. At 06 a.m., Nova stood in the lowest lit hallway of Hollis Dynamics, right between the loading dock and the security station. The lights flickered slightly above her. The floor beneath her feet hummed with quiet mechanical life. She was done scrubbing floors, done playing harmless, done accepting this new, silent violence as just part of the job. Her badge had been deactivated, her access limited, her identity, and still unknown to them, now actively hunted. And still, she stayed. Because leaving would have given them what they wanted, a clean story. She wasn't here to make stories tidy. She was here to tell the truth, even if she had to bleed it out one hallway at a time. Down the corridor, the security door buzzed open. Tristan Weller walked out. Nova didn't hide. He spotted her immediately, his steps slowing when he saw the cart, the gloves, the hoodie. She met his gaze, silent, steady. He walked toward her, casual like always, the kind of casual only men in power could afford. "Still here?" he said, tilting his head. "Figured you'd take the hint." Nova didn't answer. Tristan glanced at the cart. "Let me guess, one last sweep? Looking for bugs you didn't plant?" She didn't move. "Funny thing," he continued, voice calm but razor-edged. "It found a folder, unmarked, buried on a shared drive. Some very specific clips, some very curious notes. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Nova kept her face still. Tristan leaned in slightly. "You know, if you were anyone else, I'd call this sabotage. But you?" He looked her up and down. "You're just another overreaching temp. Probably thought if you made enough noise, someone would notice. Someone would promote you out of pity." Nova's jaw clenched, but her voice, when it came, was even. "You afraid of pity, Mr. Weller?" He blinked. "What?" "You said pity," she repeated. "That's not what you're afraid of. You're afraid of proof." Tristan's smile faded, just a little. They stood like that, in silence for a moment. Then he leaned in, voice low. "You think you're smart, but I run this floor. You disappear tomorrow, and nobody asks a single question." Nova nodded slowly. "You're right," she said. "Damn right." "But you know what's funny?" she added. "Sometimes disappearing is the only way to be seen." And with that, she pushed her cart around him. Slow, steady, never looked back. 15 minutes later, in the employee break room on the 35th floor, Nova opened her laptop. Not the company-issued one, but her own. Encrypted. Hidden inside the hollowed-out base of her mop bucket. She connected to a private network, authenticated with a biometric key. Uploaded a folder labeled Hollis Internal Conduct. Level 3 private inside were video files from surveillance footage, stored copies she'd rerouted through silent nodes, audio recordings from every conversation in which she had been mocked, threatened, or used as a prop, timestamp notes of badge deactivation, policy changes, and HR workarounds, photos of the DEI audit documents found in Tristan's office, screenshot of Samantha Holt's text, and a transcript of Alan Chu's restriction notice. The flyer from Every Voice Matters Week, ironically stained with a coffee ring and dust. She didn't hit send. Not yet. She copied it to a secure drive, marked it, to board, time sensitive, and slid it into the hidden pocket in her backpack. At 2:03 a.m., Nova returned to the janitorial locker room to find Ramona waiting, arms crossed, face grim. "They asked me if I'd noticed anything strange about you," Ramona said. Nova said nothing. "I told them no," Ramona continued. "Then I told them if they were going to start interrogating women for doing their jobs, they better start with payroll. Bunch of snakes hiding behind spreadsheets." Nova cracked a faint smile. Ramona walked up, softer now. "They know, don't they?" Nova nodded once. "They're scared." Nova didn't answer. Ramona put a hand on her shoulder. "Good," she said. "Let them be." Before leaving for the night, Nova stood once more in front of the glass lobby. Same hallway, same company, same marble floors she'd mopped 3 nights ago after a man poured water at her feet. Only now she wasn't a shadow. She was a witness. And witnesses? They don't vanish. They testify. She zipped her hoodie, picked up her backpack, walked into the elevator. No fear, no permission, no apology. Let them try to silence her. Let them chase ghosts. Because soon she was going to walk into that boardroom, not as Layla, but as Nova Bennett, and she wasn't coming alone. The city had barely stretched into morning when Marlon Bennett opened his eyes. No alarm, no assistant, no movement from the grand four-bedroom home nestled in the hills above the bay. He hadn't slept long, not since the footage arrived. At 4:22 a.m., a secure link had landed in his private inbox. The one even his board didn't know existed. Encrypted, masked, anonymous, but not unfamiliar. The first frame was dark, then light. Then his daughter, Nova, on her knees in a glass conference room, scrubbing a floor that was already spotless. Laughter in the background, a splash of water, a slow zoom in on her face as she stood in silence. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. But he saw it. He saw everything. Now as morning sun spilled across his office walls, Marlon sat motionless in the worn leather chair he'd kept since the company's garage day origins. Beside him, the voice of Jordan Fay, his longtime chief of staff, and the only man allowed to speak freely in his silence. They locked her out, disabled her credentials just before midnight. Security flagged her as a potential threat. Marlon didn't blink. They're painting her as an infiltrator, Jordan continued. Whispers are being planted. Her presence reframed as some kind of social experiment gone rogue. Not officially, of course, but it's moving. Another long pause. And they've all forgotten, Jordan said finally, whose name is on the damn building. That's when Marlon stood. No rush, no dramatic flourish. He simply got up, walked over to the built-in safe beneath his bookshelf, and pulled out an envelope. Thick, sealed, gold embossed with the Hollis Dynamics crest. It was labeled in his handwriting, Emergency Override. Internal Protocol Code 011. Have the board ready, he said, voice calm as thunderclouds. Tonight. Jordan's eyebrows raised. In person? Marlon nodded. Closed door. No lawyers. No assistants. Phones off. If they ask why, tell them Nova will be there. Jordan paused, then said, that'll scare 'em more than subpoenas. At 9:45 a.m., Marlon arrived at Hollis HQ through the maintenance entrance. No town cars, no press. He wore dark jeans, a navy coat, and a black baseball cap that shaded his features just enough to be mistaken for any other tired executive coming in for damage control. But everyone who saw him knew exactly who he was. Marlon didn't ride the elevator. He took the stairs, one floor at a time, pausing at each landing, looking, listening. On floor 22, he stopped by finance, asked for quarterly burn rates. On floor 26, he visited procurement, asked which departments had requested new cleaning supplies this month, and how many had budgeted extra for late-night staff reviews. On floor 30, he visited HR, smiled politely at the receptionist and requested, without raising his voice, a printout of any open investigations regarding temporary staff behavior filed in the last 2 weeks. When Rebecca Grayson, head of people operations, stammered something about policy and confidentiality, Marlon simply raised an eyebrow. I wrote those policies, he said. Bring the file. Word spread faster than a tweet. Marlon's here. He's not upstairs. He's talking to custodial? Wait, isn't his daughter? By noon, half the building was watching the security monitors more closely than their inboxes. And on floor 34, where most of the executive offices lived, the panic had begun to settle in like smoke. At 12:12 p.m., Marlon entered the janitor's break room. He didn't announce himself. He just stepped inside. There were 3 people in the room, one dozing off with headphones in, another eating leftover Chinese straight from the box, and Ramona Chase hunched over a vending machine, whacking the side panel with practiced fury. She turned, saw him, froze. He gave her a single nod. "Which locker is hers?" he asked. Ramona pointed. "Far left. Bottom row. Says Layla J." He walked over, knelt, opened it. Inside, gloves, a folded gray hoodie, a battered notebook with sticky tabs running down the side. He didn't touch it, didn't read a word, just stood, stepped back, and turned to Ramona. "She's good?" Ramona blinked. "Better than good. Quiet, sharp, doesn't flinch." Marlon nodded once more. "That's all I need," then left. At 1:30 p.m. in a high-security office on floor 39, he placed 6 envelopes on the table, each sealed, each heavy enough to make a sound when it landed. They were labeled T. Weller, D. Alcott, M. Kerr, S. Holt, R. Grayson, A. Chu. Each one contained documented evidence, not just from Nova, but from his own private audit team that had been quietly tracking internal culture breaches since Q2. None of them had seen it coming, because none of them had thought he was still watching. At 2:03 p.m., he picked up his phone and made one final call. "Tell Nova it's time. Suit up. We're not walking into that boardroom alone." At 5:37 p.m., a sleek black sedan pulled to the curb in front of Hollis Dynamics. The golden hour cast long reflections along the building's mirrored surface. But inside the car, there was no glow, only focus. Nova sat in the back seat, her hair tied back tight, her expression still. She wore a tailored charcoal gray suit. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. Her hoodie lay folded in the passenger seat beside her. A different kind of armor. Across from her sat her father. Marlon Bennett adjusted the cuff of his shirt, glancing over at her for a long moment before saying a word. "You look like your mother when you're angry," Nova smirked faintly. "I'm not angry." "No, I'm surgical." Marlon nodded slowly. "That's even better." The car door opened. Nova stepped out, heels clicking against the pavement like a metronome. Every stride precise. No stutter, no hesitation. She walked through the lobby, not as Layla the janitor, but as Nova Bennett, heir to Hollis Dynamics, and now, executor. Upstairs on the 40th floor, the boardroom was already tense. The 12 directors sat behind their nameplates, each one casting uncertain glances at the empty chairs near the end of the table. The meeting had been marked emergency confidential. No agenda, no notes, just a summons. At 5:59 p.m., the door opened. Marlon walked in first. Nova followed. The room went still. Dean Alcott blinked twice. Samantha Holt dropped her pen. Miles Kerr shifted in his seat like he suddenly realized the fabric itched. Tristan Weller stood. "You're not—" Nova cut him off. "Sit down, Mr. Weller." Her tone wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. He sat. Marlon took his place at the head of the table, but didn't speak. Instead, he pulled a plain, black folder from his briefcase, slid it across the table to the board chair, and leaned back. Inside was everything. Audio recordings, footage, stills, internal memos, a transcription of Samantha Holt's racially loaded comments, badge access logs showing Nova's midnight restrictions, the text message threat sent to a burner line, a side-by-side of Layla and Nova. Different clothes, same eyes, one by one. The board members skimmed. No one spoke. Not yet. Tristan finally broke the silence. This is entrapment. It's a setup. You used your daughter to what?" Nova cut in. "To walk among the people who run my father's company? To understand how leadership treats those they consider beneath them?" It was deceptive. So is smiling in someone's face while planning their downfall. Tristan stood again. "This is all hearsay. That recording could be anyone." Nova pulled a second folder from her briefcase and placed it before him. Inside, printed screenshots of his messages from a Slack channel titled Snack Time, a private group for executives to vent after hours. One post, dated 2 days ago, read, "If I wanted DEI lectures, I'd turn on Netflix. She can't scrub a floor right, but she wants the CEO title." Beneath it, a reply from Dean. "She should be happy we even let her scrub the floor." Nova let the silence sink in, then added calmly, "I was happy to scrub the floor. What I won't do is let it become the ceiling." The board chair, an older white woman with sharp eyes and sharper memory, cleared her throat. "Nova, are you submitting this as part of a formal complaint or an executive motion?" Nova looked around the room, eyes resting on each face that once smiled politely while carving knives beneath the table. She answered clearly, "I'm submitting this as both." Marlon finally spoke. "I built this company to outlive me, not to outgrow its soul. The people listed in this file," he tapped the black folder, "violated policy, ethics, and basic human decency. You all read our mission. Excellence without arrogance. Power with purpose. We've drifted." He looked at his daughter. "But tonight, we recenter." The vote wasn't long. Tristan was removed from his position. Dean stepped down before the motion even passed. Samantha Holt left in tears, escorted by HR. And Miles, he didn't argue. He just slumped back in his chair, whispering something to himself like a man who finally realized he never deserved the seat he sat in. As the boardroom emptied, Nova remained seated, staring out the window at the city glowing beneath her. Marlon placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said. She shook her head. "No," she replied. "I revealed it." The boardroom cleared out slowly, like fog after a storm. Not because the room had warmed, but because the people inside knew the weather had changed. Nova stayed behind, standing by the glass wall, arms crossed, her reflection caught somewhere between the skyline and the memory of a girl in a gray hoodie scrubbing floors. She didn't move when the door clicked shut behind the last board member, didn't flinch when Marlon stepped beside her. He was quiet for a beat, then said, "They'll write about this day." Nova's eyes stayed on the city. "Let them. You know they'll say we ambushed them." "Good," she said. "Let them know what it feels like." Behind them, Jordan entered carrying a folder. He placed it on the table and cleared his throat. "It's done," he said. "All 6 executives have signed departure agreements. Legal's going to spin it as a strategic reorganization. HR will conduct media training for the rest, and," he paused, "we've restored full access to Nova's credentials. New badge. Full authority." He handed her a small envelope. Nova took it, opened it slowly. Inside, a crisp white badge with silver lettering. Nova Bennett, Chief Operations Officer, Hollis Dynamics. Marlon watched her. "I told the board you weren't ready," he said softly. "That's why I sent you down there." She looked up, eyes sharp. "And now?" He smiled, just barely. "Now I know I was wrong." Later that evening, as twilight spilled across the skyline, Nova walked the halls of Hollis for the first time as herself. Not as Layla, not as someone to ignore or command, but as the woman in charge of rebuilding what power had eroded. She wore the badge at her hip, and tucked into her jacket pocket was the gray hoodie, not as a disguise, but as a reminder. She made her way to floor 36, the same floor where Tristan once poured water at her feet. It was empty now. The lights dimmed, chairs tucked in neatly as if nothing had ever happened here. She walked to the window, the same pane of glass she had scrubbed that night. It gleamed, but the memory clung to it. She reached out, fingertips brushing against the surface, and whispered. They saw a cleaning girl. They didn't see a reckoning. The door opened behind her. She turned to see Ramona standing in the hallway, holding a small envelope. Wasn't sure you'd still be here, Ramona said. I never left, Nova replied. Ramona chuckled. Heard the news? Word travels fast when the floor crew's group chat starts lighting up. She stepped forward and handed the envelope to Nova. From the team. They didn't know who you were, but they knew what you were doing. Took us a while to figure it out. Guess you were better at pretending than we gave you credit for. Nova opened the envelope. Inside, a folded piece of paper with a short note, handwritten in different pens. You saw us, and we saw you back. Nova's throat tightened. For all the corporate applause and headlines that might follow, this was the only endorsement she needed. She hugged Ramona, not as a superior, but as a sister in survival. That night, as Nova left the building, she didn't take the elevator. She walked down every single floor, all the way to the loading dock, the same path she had walked each night as Layla. Every hallway, every mop bucket, every camera that caught her silence. Now she passed them on her terms. Outside, the night was cool. The hoodie hung over her arm. She looked up at the logo carved into the stone above the front entrance. Hollis Dynamics. Est by M. Bennett. Below it, for the first time, a new plaque had been installed. Just one line. No role too small. No voice too quiet. Nova smiled. They tried to erase her story. Instead, they made it louder. The morning after the board meeting, Tristan Weller woke to silence. No calendar alerts, no back-to-back Zooms, no pinging Slack threads asking for quick alignment. His phone, once a constant symphony of attention, sat mute on his nightstand. He rubbed his eyes and glanced at the time. 7:03 a.m. Odd. He tapped open his work inbox. Access denied. He tried again. Still locked out. He refreshed. Then again. By the third try, the chill in his chest spread. He reached for his company-issued tablet. No access. He checked his key card. Suspended. Then came the final blow. A notification from HR forwarded to his personal email. Subject: Termination of employment, Hollis Dynamics. Dear Mr. Weller, in accordance with Executive Conduct Policy 4.3, your contract with Hollis Dynamics has been terminated effective immediately. A courier has been dispatched to retrieve all company property within 24 hours. Regards, HR Executive Office. He didn't finish reading. Because just beneath that email was another. Nova Bennett has been appointed acting COO, effective immediately, and suddenly everything made sense. By noon, every digital trace of Tristan Weller had been scrubbed from Hollis Dynamics. His bio disappeared from the executive page. His name removed from open project trackers. Even the shared Slack channel Snack Time, once a safe haven for snide jokes and unchecked bias, had been deleted, wiped, gone, as if he'd never existed. Meanwhile, in a quiet, sealed conference room on floor 39, Nova sat with legal and HR, reviewing the terms of 6 separation packages. All signed, no lawsuits, not a single formal challenge. Because when you have surveillance footage, private channel logs, witness affidavits, and the full weight of the company's founder behind you, even the boldest egos know when they've lost. Dean Alcott tried to spin his exit as a personal decision to realign with his values. He posted a farewell note on LinkedIn with a stock photo of mountains and a caption about leadership transitions being healthy for innovation. The post got 12 likes, but within hours, anonymous comments began flooding it. Funny, didn't you film someone on her knees at work? Did your values realign after the recording leaked? Leadership is earned, not inherited by privilege. Dean deleted the post by sunset. Miles Kerr, the whisperer, was more discreet. He quietly withdrew from the industry, activating an old severance clause and resigning for health reasons. But people remembered his voice. People remembered what he laughed at. And when he tried to apply for a consulting gig 3 months later, Nova personally sent the hiring firm a document labeled, "For context." No explanation, just context. Samantha Holt, who once barked orders about spilled smoothies and made snide remarks about Nova reading, received her own letter of separation and a follow-up reminder that all workplace messages, including text to personal numbers during work hours, are part of recordable conduct. She cried in HR, said it wasn't fair, that she didn't know who Layla was, that she was just following the vibe. But the vibe changed, and now she was gone. On the operations floor, a new poster appeared outside the break room. You never know who's watching, but always know what they deserve. No logo, no author, but everyone knew who had it placed there. Tristan, meanwhile, tried calling a few board members. Voicemail. He tried messaging legal, automated response. Finally, in a last-ditch attempt, he emailed Marlon Bennett directly. I understand there was miscommunication. I'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss this in person and clarify any misunderstandings. The reply came in a single sentence. From Nova, the only misunderstanding was believing power would protect you from character. Later that week, a town hall was called for all Hollis Dynamics employees, in person and virtual, with attendance required. The auditorium buzzed with rumor. Some expected another scandal, others feared layoffs. At precisely 10 a.m., Nova Bennett stepped onto the stage. No slideshow, no talking points, just truth. She wore a simple black blazer over a gray blouse. The hoodie, now framed behind glass on the stage wall. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Legacy is not what you inherit. It's what you clean up." The room fell into still silence. Nova stepped to the microphone and said, "Some of you knew me as Layla. Some of you didn't see me at all, but I saw all of you. What I witnessed on these floors wasn't just unkindness. It was a culture, one built on fear, silence, and superiority. But we are rewriting that now. If you ever wondered who we are the people who clean up messes, even when we didn't make them. And if you're here to build that kind of company, I welcome you. No applause, not yet. Just reflection and respect." The ripple from Nova's town hall didn't stop inside the auditorium. It surged through the company like a silent quake, shifting the landscape beneath every desk, behind every conference room wall. No one said it outright, but everyone knew. The era of invincibility was over. The first to feel it was HR. Within hours of Nova's address, a line quietly formed outside the People Ops office. Not angry, not frantic, just long. One by one, staff who'd been stepped on, the interns, the receptionists, the night crew who'd taken feedback in the form of humiliation, began to submit documentation, testimonies, screenshots. It wasn't a mob. It was a release, a breaking of years-long tension, of learned silence. They'd seen someone walk into the fire with a mop and come out with the microphone. And now they realized, if she could speak, maybe we could too. By midweek, Nova had set up an internal task force called the Ground Floor Initiative, a cross-departmental review board made up of employees at every level, from night janitors to junior devs to executive VPs. Its mission? To audit the power dynamic. Not productivity, not profit, people. She gave them clearance to review anonymous complaints, job satisfaction surveys, internal messaging channels, anything that painted a real picture of the human ecosystem at Hollis Dynamics. And she gave them something else, immunity. If you tell the truth, she said, you will not be punished. In quiet corners of the company's internal network, testimonials poured in. One contractor wrote, "I was told by a senior analyst not to wear my natural hair to meetings because it looked too protesty. I straightened it for 2 years." A maintenance tech added, "I was written up for asking not to clean a bathroom while execs were eating sushi on the toilet lid. I was told to be grateful for the opportunity." A junior product designer shared, "I've never seen someone like me in leadership. I thought I never would." The shock wasn't in the content. It was in the volume. They weren't isolated incidents. They were systemic patterns. The truth was simple and devastating. The company had been leaking empathy for years. No one had noticed, or rather, no one had wanted to, until Nova made it impossible not to look. Meanwhile, the 6 former executives who'd been removed began to surface in whispers around the industry. Tristan tried to get on a panel at an emerging tech conference. The organizer declined. Quietly. Dean launched a podcast called Culture Wars in Corporate America. It had 3 episodes before disappearing entirely. Miles made an appearance on a consulting firm's advisory board. Nova didn't say a word. She just sent their founder a white envelope labeled due diligence material. The next morning, Miles' name was gone from their website. None of them were blacklisted. They were just known now, and being known was enough. Back inside Hollis, Nova started walking the halls again. Not in silence, not in disguise, but not as a showpiece either. She walked like someone who remembered the floor under her knees, who remembered bleach under her nails, who remembered being invisible. And because of that, she saw everything now. On floor 32, she noticed a new receptionist avoiding eye contact. She stopped, smiled, and asked, "First week?" The girl blinked, nodded nervously. Nova handed her a card. "Text this number if anyone tells you you're just the front desk. I'll come back personally." The girl didn't speak, but her eyes filled with something Nova recognized: safety. By Friday, a new mural had been painted in the employee cafe. It showed a woman in a gray hoodie pushing a janitor's cart down a marble hallway. The hallway shimmered, distorted like a dream. At the end of it, the reflection on the floor showed the same woman, but dressed in a sharp blazer, standing at a podium. The mural wasn't labeled. It didn't need to be. Everyone understood. That hallway was the journey. That reflection was the truth. That woman was the future. Upstairs, in a room once reserved for quarterly projections, Nova sat with a new leadership team. Half of them were first-generation college grads. 2 had come from the company's night shift. 1 had started as a temp. They didn't have the loudest resumes, but they had something else: conscience. And for the first time in a long time, Hollis Dynamics wasn't just profitable, it was human. Nova looked around the table, then said quietly, "Power didn't change me. A beat." She looked each of them in the eye. It revealed me. That weekend, while the rest of the city unwound, a single office light still glowed on the 39th floor of Hollis Dynamics. Nova sat alone. No board, no father, no crowd. Just her, a laptop, and the hoodie folded neatly on the edge of her desk. The same hoodie that had once absorbed insults, sweat, and humiliation like a sponge. Now it held a different kind of weight. Justice delivered. She tapped her fingers against her temple, replaying the week, the termination letters, the task force, the town hall, the shift. Not a shift in policy, a shift in culture. But she knew better than to mistake a single victory for a permanent change. Systems resist transformation. People forget what they've learned. And silence loves a comeback. That's why she was still here, watching, guiding, and when necessary, striking back. She opened a new document titled Post-Incident Transition Plan, Cultural Safeguards and Ethical Reinforcement for internal leadership review. Her first line wasn't a quote from any CEO handbook. It was what Ramona had whispered to her in the stairwell just 5 nights before. "Don't let them break your walk." She typed it, bolded it, then began outlining a new chapter for Hollis. The next morning, a company-wide email hit inboxes at exactly 7 a.m. from Nova Bennett. Subject: New Beginnings. What we build next. It read, in part, "What happened here wasn't a scandal. It was a symptom. And symptoms don't disappear with firings. They fade when truth becomes practice, when values move from walls to workflows. If you stayed silent before, I don't blame you, but I invite you now. Speak, Help me make this place one where power listens, not dictates. Where the break room and the boardroom carry the same dignity. If you're with me, I'm here. If you're not, well, it's going to get uncomfortable. She signed it simply, NB. And it worked. The same executives who used to avoid eye contact with janitorial staff now said thank you. Awkwardly, yes, but sincerely. The same interns who once feared asking questions now had a monthly breakfast with department heads. The same people who watched Nova scrub floors in silence now watched her walk past and stood a little straighter. Respect wasn't automatic anymore. It was earned, and it had to be. But perhaps the clearest signal that the culture had truly changed came 1 week later, when a new custodial team member named Angela reported an inappropriate comment from a department manager during a late shift. She filed it using the newly launched Silent Chain feedback portal anonymously. By noon, that manager had been pulled from duty pending review. By the next morning, he resigned. Angela never said a word to Nova directly. But on her next shift, Nova found a sticky note on her locker. I used the thing you built. It works. Nova read it 3 times, then smiled, because that's what power looked like. Not in how loud it was, but in how quietly it could protect someone. That evening, Nova joined her father for dinner. No board talk, no reports, just 2 people eating takeout on the back patio, the city lights blinking below like old secrets. Marlon sipped his tea and glanced at her. You know, he said, I thought you'd burn it all down. Nova chuckled. I wanted to. Why didn't you? She paused, looking out into the dark. Because fire leaves ash. I wanted roots. He nodded. Then after a long beat, he said, I'm proud of what I built. But I'm prouder of what you made it become. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Some things, like legacy, are best left unsaid. But that night, before heading home, she stopped by the 35th floor, where a group of night shift workers were finishing their rounds. Angela was among them. Nova gave her a nod. Angela gave her a smirk. Respect, silent, real. Nova looked down the hallway. Same marble, same echo. But this time, she wasn't alone. This time, everyone knew who she was. And more importantly, they knew what she stood for. Monday morning, outside the glass tower of Hollis Dynamics, the city pulsed with its usual rhythm. Honking cars, espresso machines hissing on every block, the shuffle of loafers on concrete. But inside, the tempo had shifted. Not loud, not sudden, but real. Something had cracked open in the heart of the company. And for the first time in years, light was pouring in. Not the LED kind, the kind that comes from truth. Nova Bennett stood in the center of the executive conference room, the same space where they'd once poured water at her feet and laughed about it. Today, the laughter was gone. In its place, silence, attentive, intentional. She faced a dozen managers and team leads, none of whom dared glance at their phones. This wasn't an all hands. It wasn't a performance review. There were no charts, no KPIs on the wall, just her and the lesson. You know who I am, she began, hands resting calmly on the edge of the polished table. But more importantly, you know who I've been. They listened. They called me Layla. They asked me to clean spills, pick up trash, and not make eye contact. And I did. She walked slowly down the row of chairs. I did it without telling you who I was, without pulling rank, without calling HR, because I needed to see who you were when no one was watching. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Nova didn't pause. I wasn't looking for flaws, she continued. I was looking for truth. And the truth is this. We built a company where titles came before character. She stopped walking, looked each of them in the eye, and we're done with that. After the meeting, Nova took the back stairwell down to the 32nd floor, her favorite way to move through the building. Elevators were fast. Stairs told stories. Each landing reminded her of something. Floor 38, where Dean had joked about optics over experience. Floor 35, where Samantha barked at her like a servant. Floor 30, where her badge turned red and she stood outside in silence, while employees inside pretended not to see her. Now, they greeted her by name. She stopped at the open floor of new hire orientation, where 25 fresh employees sat nervously adjusting their lanyards. They weren't just coders and designers. Nova had made sure of that. There was a night shift custodian named Melina, now a junior operations coordinator, a cafeteria worker promoted into logistics, a former delivery driver hired as an inventory tech. Nova stepped in quietly, no entourage, no announcement. The orientation lead spotted her and gave a small nod. "Would you like to say a few words?" She walked to the front, smiled, then said, "My name is Nova Bennett. Some of you know me as the COO. Others might have seen me in a hoodie pushing a mop cart." Both are true. A few new hires exchanged glances. Nova continued, "This company once forgot that character isn't shown in a pitch deck. It shows up in break rooms, in how you treat the cleaning crew, in what you say when someone isn't wearing a name you recognize." She stepped closer to the crowd. "I want you to help me build a culture where no one has to pretend to be less to survive." One hand went up, a young man with a notebook tucked under his arm. "Why didn't you just reveal who you were from the start?" Nova didn't hesitate. "Because the only way to know the truth," she said, "is to become invisible in a place where everyone's trying to be seen." After the session, one of the new hires, a shy woman in oversized glasses, approached her near the elevator. "I worked janitorial at my last job," she said quietly. 3 years. Never even met a VP. Nova smiled. "You just did." That afternoon, Nova walked into the back halls of the lower-level maintenance wing. Ramona was there, leaning against a supply cart, sipping lukewarm coffee. "Still walking like a soldier," Ramona said. "Still watching like one," Nova replied. Ramona chuckled. "You gave them a scare. They needed one." A beat of silence passed. Then Ramona looked up and said, "You did more than clean up their mess." Nova raised an eyebrow. "You taught them how to stop making it." It was late afternoon when Nova walked into the company library, one of Hollis Dynamics' least used spaces. Most executives had forgotten it even existed. Rows of business books, industry journals, and outdated tech manuals collected dust here. But today, someone had cracked a window open, and the breeze stirred the pages like whispers. Nova sat at a table in the far corner. She wasn't there to read, she was waiting. Minutes later, Will Danner walked in, the executive director of R&D, one of the few who hadn't participated in the humiliation, but also one who hadn't stopped it. He approached slowly, hands in his pockets. "Got your message," he said. Nova nodded. "Thanks for coming." Will pulled out a chair, sat across from her. For a moment, they just listened to the creak of the old air vents. "I owe you something," he finally said. Nova tilted her head. "What's that?" "An apology. For not saying something sooner, for letting silence buy me comfort." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached into her bag and placed a familiar object on the table between them. The mop key, the same one she used every night, bent slightly at the edge, cold in its simplicity. Will looked at it, then back at her. "You left it behind," Nova said. "You didn't mock me, but you also didn't step in. And silence in rooms like that becomes agreement." "I know," he said quietly. "I don't need you to be sorry," she continued. "I need you to be better." Will nodded. "Starting now." She picked up the key. "Then help me. Not with a speech, not with a PR campaign, but with the systems, with the floors nobody checks, with the people who never get invited to speak." "You mean the janitors?" "I mean everyone who ever had to be quiet to keep a job. That evening, Nova sent out a new company-wide initiative, Project Open Door. It outlined a direct access program allowing any employee, regardless of role or department, to submit cultural observations, ethical concerns, or improvement ideas straight to the executive team, bypassing HR, middle management, and the long chain of delays. All entries would be reviewed weekly. Top submissions would be acknowledged publicly, and one anonymous story each month would be chosen for a full-scale company dialogue. A discussion room hosted not by leadership, but by staff, with executives attending as listeners only. Some scoffed at first. A suggestion box with better branding, they said. But then, the first story dropped. It was titled The Man in the Orange Vest. It detailed how a veteran janitor named Darius had worked 16 straight weekends without being asked once if he needed help, and how one junior engineer finally brought him coffee and asked him his name. That engineer had since become his friend. The story didn't shame anyone. It revealed something bigger. Invisibility was a choice, made by those who refused to see, and now they were choosing differently. Ramona read that story aloud during a shift meeting. By the end, half the crew was nodding. The other half were quietly stunned. "I never thought I'd hear something like that in a company memo," one said. "You wouldn't have," Ramona replied. Before Nova, Nova didn't attend the first discussion room. She watched from her office, not to monitor but to make space. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about what would grow in her place. In the wake of her quiet rebellion, her unspoken vow to never again let silence win. The next morning, as Nova walked through the cafeteria, she passed by Angela wiping down the counter. A group of product managers stood nearby, deep in conversation. One of them paused, turned to Angela and said, "Hey, I like that story about Darius. Thanks for sharing it." Angela blinked, then smiled. "I didn't write it," she said, "but I could have." Nova didn't stop walking. She didn't need to say anything. The lesson had taken root, and now it was speaking for itself. Friday afternoon. Week's end. Nova stood alone in the top-floor observatory room, a space her father once used for investor calls and long, brooding strategy sessions. The wall of windows offered a 270-degree view of the city, skyscrapers casting long shadows over neighborhoods he had once told her they'd help rise. It had been 1 month since she walked into this building disguised as a custodian, 1 month since she swallowed humiliation instead of pride, so she could taste the truth. Now, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, she wasn't thinking about revenge or legacy. She was thinking about how it felt to be seen. A knock. Then the door creaked open. Jordan, her father's former chief of staff and now hers, leaned in. "Someone's here to see you." Nova raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "Two interns from this cycle. Said they have something for you." Nova gestured. "Send them in." A moment later, Sammy and Jared, both barely 22 and wide-eyed from the weight of recent weeks, entered the room. Jared held something wrapped in craft paper. Sammy clutched a letter. "We didn't want to wait for the next feedback session," Sammy said, voice nervous but sincere. Nova smiled. "You don't need a session to be heard." Jared stepped forward and carefully unwrapped the object. A framed print. Inside, a drawing in black ink and soft watercolor. A janitor's card in the foreground. A gray hoodie hanging from the handle. Behind it, a glass wall reflecting a woman in a suit standing tall at the head of a long hallway. Nova froze. It was more than a drawing. It was a mirror of her journey. "We made this," Jared said, "because we've never seen someone in power start from the floor. Not really, not like this." Nova's voice softened. "Thank you. I'll hang it in my office." Sammy handed her the letter. "It's not from us," she added. "It's from Melina." She didn't want to give it in person. Nova recognized the name immediately. The former night custodian promoted into operations. She opened the envelope carefully and read, Ms. Bennett, I used to clean the back hallway outside your dad's old office. I knew who he was. I didn't know who you were. When I saw the video of what they did to you and what you did afterward, I cried, not just for you, for myself, because I didn't think anyone would ever do that for people like me. You didn't clean floors to prove a point. You cleaned them to remember who you are. You reminded me too. Thank you for not disappearing when it got ugly. Thank you for making the ugly visible. I'm still here. I'm still cleaning. But I walk different now. With love, Melina Nova folded the letter slowly. She looked out the window again. Everything outside looked the same, but inside everything had changed. Later that evening, Nova returned to the ground floor. The building had emptied out. The maintenance wing buzzed softly, radios humming faint classic soul, the kind her grandmother used to play on Sundays while scrubbing baseboards. She found Ramona finishing up shift logs in the break room, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug that said, World's Okayest Supervisor. Nova leaned against the doorframe. Tired yet? She asked. Ramona looked up, smirked. Since 1996. They shared a quiet laugh. Nova stepped forward. I got a letter from Melina. Ramona raised an eyebrow. She finally wrote it? She said she walks different now. Ramona nodded. Damn right she does. Nova pulled something from her jacket pocket and slid it onto the table. It was a smaller version of the framed drawing, signed by both interns. Below the sketch, one sentence in small block letters. Never forget where your power was first ignored. Ramona picked it up, ran her fingers along the edge. You hanging this in your office? Nova shook her head. I'm hanging it in the break room. Ramona's eyes softened. You sure? Yeah, Nova said, because this room saved me before the boardroom ever could. On her way out, Nova passed a young custodian mopping the front lobby, headphones in, head bobbing slightly to the beat. She paused, tapped him gently on the shoulder. He pulled one earbud out, startled. Yes, ma'am? Nova nodded at his cart. Your mop bucket's leaking a little. He looked down, embarrassed. Oh, sorry, I didn't notice. Nova reached into her bag, pulled out a fresh mop ring from her old janitorial kit, one she'd never thrown away. Use this, she said. He blinked. You carry mop parts? She smiled. I carry memories. As she stepped through the revolving doors, night draping the city in soft gold, Nova pulled her hoodie from her bag. She didn't put it on. She just held it in one hand. Not as disguise, not as defense, but as testament to what had been cleaned, to what had been revealed, and to what still needed work. The sun had not yet risen. The city was quiet, humming gently under the haze of dawn. And inside the quiet, before emails were opened, before coffee was poured, before the hum of corporate life reasserted itself, Nova Bennett walked alone. No bodyguards, no entourage, no digital calendar beeping reminders into her ear. Just her and the slow rhythm of her boots against the tiled sidewalk outside Hollis Dynamics. She held the hoodie in her hands, not draped over her shoulders like a hero's cape, not folded into her briefcase like a relic, but carried, openly, plainly, like a truth that didn't need permission to exist. The building loomed ahead, glass and steel like always, but it no longer swallowed her. It recognized her now, not because of her name, not because of her title, but because of what she had done. She scanned her badge at the side entrance, the same service door she once entered night after night as Layla James, the invisible janitor. The lock clicked open. She stepped inside. Down the hallway, Ramona stood waiting with 2 coffees. Couldn't sleep, she asked. Nova shook her head. Didn't want to. They walked together quietly, past storage rooms and mop closets, past vending machines humming out their tired lights. Nova sipped the coffee. It was bitter, familiar. How long has it been? She asked. Ramona raised an eyebrow. Since what? Since a CEO walked this hallway and didn't ask for a shortcut. Ramona smirked. You're not CEO yet. Nova grinned. That's what makes it count. They reached the janitor's lounge. It looked the same. Cracked tiles, a crooked bulletin board, a stack of magazines no one read. But today something was different. On the far wall, where once hung a schedule of rotating shifts and broken equipment logs, now hung a framed photograph. It showed Nova from behind, hoodie on, mop cart in front of her, walking down the marble hallway of the 37th floor. The caption read, "Don't clean to be seen. Clean because you see everything." Nova blinked once, then twice. Who did that? She asked. Ramona shrugged. Someone who watched, someone who knew. By 7 a.m., the rest of the building had begun to stir. Emails fired off. Conference calls queued. The Monday machine kicked in. But Nova didn't go to her office. She walked the building floor by floor, hoodie in hand, saying hello to people who used to avoid her eyes. A few were bold enough to ask, "Why'd you keep it?" She smiled every time. Because power doesn't live in the suit. It lives in what you survive to wear it. At 9:13 a.m., she walked past the open floor engineering wing, where a new junior dev, barely 20, looked up and gave a timid wave. He was wearing a hoodie too. Not expensive, not branded, just worn and proud. Nova stopped. She gave him a small nod. It wasn't just acknowledgement, it was inheritance. At noon in the central atrium, a gathering took place. No announcement, no scheduled time, just an organic pulse. Staff from all departments quietly filtering in as words spread that Nova's walking the floor. By 12:14, nearly 200 people had assembled. Nova stood at the center. No microphone, no notes, just the hoodie folded over her forearm. She looked out over the crowd. Faces of all colors, roles, pay grades. The same people who had once worked in silos, now standing shoulder to shoulder. She lifted the hoodie for all to see. This, she said, voice firm but gentle, was never a disguise. It was my truth, the kind I needed to remember, the kind I wasn't sure the rest of you could handle. She paused. And you didn't. At first, a few heads dropped, but then some of you saw, some of you changed. Some of you helped me teach a lesson we've needed for a long time. She raised the hoodie high. From now on, this is our uniform. Not for janitors, not for execs. For everyone who's willing to walk through the fire and come out clean. A long silence. Then applause. Real. Full. No one clapped just because others did. They clapped because they understood. Nova placed the hoodie into a new glass case that had been installed that morning beside the atrium's main staircase. The plaque beneath it read, "The lesson is lived, not given. NB." Then she turned and walked away. The hoodie stayed behind glass, but the lesson it carried moved freely. In how people spoke, how they paused before speaking, how they remembered to say thank you to those who once passed them in silence. That afternoon, Nova returned to her office for the first time that day. It wasn't grand, intentionally, a simple walnut desk, 2 chairs without arms, so no one felt smaller sitting across from her. A dry erase wall covered with sticky notes from various departments, anonymous suggestions ranging from pay equity audits every 6 months to can we get better vending snacks that aren't just low-fat lies? She read them all, kept every one, because voices weren't just for speeches. They were blueprints. At 2:30 p.m., she met with the Ground Floor Initiative, now expanded to include one representative from every department, including logistics, cafeteria, IT support, and security. Angela was there, sitting up front, her notebook open, badge now clipped proudly to her collar. The same woman who once whispered complaints in back hallways now spoke with firm, measured confidence. Transparency's improved, But respect still varies by floor, she said, especially when it comes to contractors. Some execs still treat temps like ghosts. Nova nodded. Can you name anyone? Angela glanced around the room, then said, Not yet, but we're watching. The same way you watched. Nova smiled. That's all I need to know. After the meeting, Nova walked the long corridor past the server wing, an area most leaders never bothered visiting. Inside, a young systems analyst named Devin, who'd only been with the company 3 months, looked up from his monitor. His eyes widened when he saw her. Oh, I didn't expect... hi, Nova grinned. Hey, I'm just working on, code. Sorry, I didn't mean to slow you down. You didn't, she said. What's your name again? Devin. Well, Devin, thank you for the work you're doing. I know it's not flashy, but it's seen, and it matters. He blinked, then nodded. That means a lot. Nova didn't linger, didn't need to, because sometimes leadership was just pausing long enough to let someone feel real. By 4:00 p.m., Nova returned to the floor where her journey began, the custodial wing. The old locker she'd used as Layla still stood there. Number 19B, paint chipped at the corners, a faint dent in the top like a quiet scar. She unlocked it. Inside, her original gloves, a folded shift schedule, and a small envelope labeled "For Later." She'd forgotten about it. It was something she'd written midway through the mission, during one of her lowest nights, when she wasn't sure if she'd finish what she started. When the glass had been smeared with fingerprints that weren't really about glass at all, she opened the envelope. Inside was a short letter, written in her own handwriting. If you're reading this, you stayed. You didn't break. You didn't scream. You didn't hide. You just kept walking. Remember what that felt like. Remember who they thought you were. And remind them, you were never just the help. You were the one who held the building together. Now build something better. N. She folded the letter gently, placed it in her coat pocket, and locked the locker one final time. Then she taped a new nameplate on its door. Legacy Do Not Clean. At 6:17 p.m., the building began to clear. People left in twos and threes, talking softly about everything and nothing. It was the kind of exit Nova had long observed. Heads down, earbuds in, moments stolen before the commute swallowed them whole. But this evening was different. As she stood near the front doors, ready to leave herself, she heard a voice. Ms. Bennett? She turned. A girl, maybe 18, 19, approached, wearing a black Hollis polo shirt and a nervous smile. I just started last week. Food services, I don't know what to say, really. Nova waited. The girl fidgeted, then said, My dad used to tell me, keep your head down, just work. Don't make noise. But after watching you, I think maybe that's not the only way anymore. Nova stepped forward. What's your name? Brianna. Well, Brianna, Nova said, her voice even and warm. You don't have to make noise to be heard. But if you do choose to speak, speak like the world's been waiting for you. Brianna smiled, eyes wide, then asked softly, Can I hug you? Nova opened her arms. You don't have to ask. The streetlights flickered on as Nova stepped outside. The city hadn't changed. The cabs still honked like they owned the road. Strangers still passed each other like ghosts. Somewhere in the distance, a food truck played salsa music into the night air. But Nova had changed. She didn't walk with the weight of revenge anymore. She walked with the rhythm of clarity. No longer the girl scrubbing away fingerprints in the shadows. Now she left imprints. She crossed the street to a bench across from Hollis Dynamics, the very same spot where she had once sat in silence. Hoodie up, eyes trained on the building that would later try to break her. She sat again now. Same bench. Different reason. This time she wasn't hiding. She was witnessing. The front doors of the company glowed under new light. Inside, she could see people walking, talking, greeting the janitorial team by name, holding elevator doors, nodding at cafeteria staff. Small gestures, but meaningful. Real, not performative. The kind of change that didn't need a press release. As she sat, someone approached from behind. The footsteps were slow, familiar. She didn't even have to turn. "Thought I might find you here," her father said. Marlon Bennett stood tall, coat collar up, hands tucked in his pockets. The man who had once built the empire. The man who once believed he had to stay quiet to keep it standing. "Come to lecture me?" Nova asked, a smirk playing on her lips. "Come to learn," he said, sitting beside her. They watched in silence as a Hollis security guard held the door open for a custodian with a full cart. "That never used to happen," Marlon murmured. Nova shrugged. "Didn't need to. No one ever saw them." "You changed that." "We changed it," she corrected. He looked at her, the reflection of the building flickering in his eyes. "I used to think legacy was about what you leave behind." "It is," she said, "but it's also about what you leave standing." He nodded slowly, then asked, "Are you ready to lead all of it?" Nova looked across at the building, its towers, its floors, the glass that once reflected her crouched in a hoodie now shining back a woman standing tall. "Yes," she said, "I am." Later that night, in a small brownstone apartment just a few blocks away, Nova unfolded her hoodie one last time. She didn't put it on. Instead, she laid it out flat on her bed and looked at it. Every wrinkle, every faded seam, the spot on the sleeve that never quite lost the scent of bleach. She picked up a needle and thread, took a patch from her desk drawer, navy blue, clean white stitching. She sewed it gently into the hem of the hoodie sleeve. The words read, "Walked through fire. Left clean." The next morning, as the building awoke again, the glass case in the atrium had changed. The hoodie was gone. In its place, a new item, a white work shirt with a name tag that read, "Melina." Framed beneath it, a simple note in Nova's handwriting. "The story isn't just mine, it never was. The hoodie walked alone, so you wouldn't have to." On the street outside, a girl with a mop cart pushed through the revolving doors. She wore a gray hoodie. She held her head high, and no one looked away, not anymore. You've just witnessed the story of Nova Bennett, a young black woman in a gray hoodie who walked into the cold, silent world of power and privilege not to be accepted, but to expose what could only be seen when you're willing to kneel down and look closely. Nova didn't shout. She didn't throw fists. She didn't storm the gates. She cleaned, quietly, relentlessly. And with the same hands that scrubbed floors, she unmasked the very people who once pretended she wasn't there. They thought her silence meant weakness. They thought her role made her irrelevant. But in the end, she was the one who held the soul of the company together. If you've ever been overlooked, if you've ever been told to stay in your place, if you've ever swallowed your voice just to survive, don't forget, your hoodie holds a story too. And the world, even when it pretends not to, needs to hear it. If this story touched something deep inside you, do this. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another silent power story, where ordinary people do extraordinary things without ever needing to scream. Share this video with someone who's ever been dismissed, disrespected, or pushed into the background. Turn on notifications because every week we bring you stories that move you, challenge you, and remind you of the strength in silent defiance. You don't need a title to change the game. You just need to know who you are and never let them take that from you. This is Silent Power Stories, where the overlooked become unforgettable. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been in Nova's shoes? What moment in her story stuck with you the most? We're listening, and you don't have to be silent anymore. See you in the next one.